Good morning, nerds. Today's tutorial is going to be the third of the prefab tutorials and probably the last one for a while. But this time, what we're going to look at is how to block out an area. And so I'm going to try to create a sample environment. Now, for this one, what I'm going to be doing is just creating a restaurant blockout. Um, in my head, I'm thinking of the layout from Bob's Burgers, but for this tutorial, I am deliberately choosing not to do any reference art. And I want to call that decision out specifically because ordinarily, especially if I'm trying to make a real space, I'm making heavy use of reference art as most good artists do. Um, I think if you're not using reference art, you're generally making a pretty big mistake. For this purpose, the reason I'm choosing not to use reference art is twofold. Number one, it saves me tabbing back and forth during the tutorial, and that can be a little bit distracting. And the other reason, and I think that's more important for this particular scenario, is that for this one, I'm pretending that I have this idea for a restaurant in my head and that it's not based on a real thing. So even though I am basing it on Bob's Burgers, and that's mostly so that way, like, you guys have a visual on what I'm trying to create, um, I'm really working off of the idea that this thing doesn't already exist somewhere. So even though it does, we're pretending it doesn't. The other thing is what I would normally do here is make pretty extensive use of some drawings by hand ahead of time to just kind of sketch out my thoughts and get those laid out. I did that in class a couple days ago, and so I'm going to kind of work off of honestly my memory of those sketches this time. So it's going to not quite be perfect. But again, that pre-draw phase is really important, but I'm just going to be talking about how to execute this in Unity, so it's not going to quite be the same. So as always, we're going to start off with a floor. I'm not going to worry too much about the size of the floor right now, so I'm going to just go ahead and create a plane in my space. Again, I'm going to double check, as always, we're going to make sure that that's zeroed out, because that's going to be a helpful way to work here. Then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start thinking about, again, this is a block out. I'm going to just start thinking about my space and how big things are and what types of primitives I've got at my disposal here. And since this is just a gray box, I'm not working too hard on modeling. I'm definitely not going to use even particularly nice prefabs, to be honest. I'm not even, and I'm definitely not going to be using something a lot better for this kind of tool like Pro Builder or something like that. Again, this is just a quick block out just to get my thoughts out and kind of plan out my space before I start making 3D models and actually make this place look good. So when we do a block out like this, and in gray boxing, we want to start with our biggest objects and preferably our most, the ones that are going to matter the most towards sizing and making sure that everything is proportional and everything else. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with my booths. So Bob's has 4 booths in the corner, and I, off of memory, I felt like those were roughly square shaped. So I'm going to work with those as cubes. And the other things I want to make sure, so I'm going to kind of have those over here in this area. I'm definitely going to have my counter space over in here. And for now, I'm just going to block out one big giant counter. I'm not going to worry too much about how it looks more specifically than that. And then I'm going to put just a row of stools here. And those stools are going to be cylinders. And although I don't want to start, I want to start with the biggest, most complicated objects. When we think about my stools, it makes the most sense for those to be cylinders. And if I'm working with a cylinder here, since the cylinder space is about 1, and I'm trying to figure out where do I start this one to make sure that this fits correctly. We've got half the cylinder above and half the cylinder below, so we're going to set our Y to 1. Okay, if that's a stool, And that feels pretty good to me. It might be a little on the short side, but that's okay. But if that's a stool, then I don't want to, I want to have all my measurements be nice and clean. So this feels good for the size of a stool. So I want to make everything kind of relative to that. And so what I'm going to do is use that kind of as my guideline for sizing purposes. So we're just going to leave that stool there for now. And I want to start thinking about booths. So I feel like if you lined 4 stools in a row, that's probably about the size of a booth. And we already kind of decided that a booth is square. So if this is if this is 1 by 1, and a cylinder does come out to be 1 by 1 at the top, it's actually 1 by 1 by 2 in terms of sizes. With actually technically I guess it's 1 by 2 by 1, isn't it? Once we factor in that y-axis there. And so what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to create my first booth. Now for this booth, again, I'm going to create a cube, and we already kind of decided on my size. So we're going to zero that out, and I'm going to create it as a 4 by 4 by 4. But now that I'm thinking about this, I really want to start setting these things up as prefabs, so that way if I edit the booth later, I can start making changes to it more easily. And because we want our prefabs to be able to be centered in specific ways and different things, I'm going to go ahead and delete my booth because I didn't really get far enough along for me to care. And I'm going to take a little bit different approach. So what I'm going to do here is start off with an empty game object. So I'm going to do create empty. And again, we're going to zero this out. And we're going to think about how a booth should look. And so what I'm going to do, I don't need to move that around. I'm just going to leave it there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off, I'm going to rename that game object to booth. I'm going to create a prefab, or I'm going to create a folder to store my prefabs. And we're going to drag that booth prefab in. And I know that I'm just blocking out, but I do want all my booths to be the same, and I'm going to want to edit these later. So we're going to make a very, very simple prefab, but we're still going to do these as prefabs. And so for my booth prefab, again, I want to think about orientation and everything else. And for my booths, what I'm going to do is to try to keep this simple, I'm going to have them come out in this area here, and then be up, so that way I can place their Y in the center. And in this case, since my Z is pointed towards me on my map, ordinarily I would think about this a little bit more, but since my map is pointed and my Z is kind of coming forward and my X is going off the side, and I want my booths here, what makes the most sense to me is have the booths kind of running at X negative in terms of space, and then center them along the Z-axis because they're all going to be along that sidewall. So this is a little bit different tactic than I took with the bookcase tutorial last time, but I think this is going to work out pretty nice for me. So, and again, I'm going to watch that floor. This time I'm not going to put planes in as guidelines. I'm just going to use this booth axis as my primary guide. So again, we're going to go ahead and create a cube. I'm going to scale that to 4 by 4 by 4 because that's the desired size of my booths here. And all I want to do here, it's already centered pretty nicely. All I want to do is take the cube and move it over there so that it's on 0. And as we can see, that's about negative 2.28. I'm going to round that off to about negative 2. Now we've got that there. And I'm going to do the exact same thing with the y-axis. And the y-axis should come up to about 2 as well. But that's going to be positive 2. And what that should do is give me, as you can see on my grid here, I'm coming out the center. So I can align the center of the booth up with a wall. But it's already aligned with my floor, and it's also aligned with the wall. So once I know how far out the walls are going to be, the booths are going to be nice and easy to place. And that's going to be about it. And just to help my blockout read a little bit better, I'm going to create myself just a real basic material here. So I'm going to go create folders. I'm going to create a materials folder. I'm going to go into the folder. I'm going to create a basic material. And we're going to color this one kind of a darkish red, just to kind of match the Bob's Burgers booth coloring. Again, those are wood and they've got some faux leather in them. But for now, this is going to be just fine. And I don't know why it always seems to do that, but the first time I try to color it, it never seems to take, and the second time it seems to work out. So we're going to go ahead and go with that. And that's a pretty matte material. That's perhaps darker than the booths are, but for this, I don't think I really care all that much. And the metallic, we're going to leave just a little tiny bit of metallic, and we're going to not make that very smooth. Again, they're that kind of that faux leather, and this looks pretty good. So we're pretty close to the defaults here. Drag that onto my cube. And there is my booth blockout. And that's going to be good enough for what we're trying to do here. It's not very pretty, but it's going to at least give me some sizing. And so I'm going to go ahead and go back into my game object, or into my game. I'm going to get out of the booth prefab. Whoops, sorry. I'm going to get out of the booth prefab. And we're going to start blocking this out. Now, my booths are going to take up about half my space. And so we need to think about if a booth is this big and a stool is this big, and again, maybe those things ought to be a little taller. And I'm thinking about this is like the back of the booth going up to about here. That stool should definitely be a little bit taller now, but we'll mess with that later. So if we're thinking about this, we definitely need a little bit more room. So if I want my booths to start about here, and then I want my counter area to start kind of about here, that'll give me a little bit of a walkway. We're really looking at my booths are at about negative 7.7 right now. So I'm just going to go ahead and nudge those to 8. That feels pretty good. We're going to go ahead and nudge those to 8, and then we'll move the, and then we'll set this up over here, and then we'll have some counter space over here, and that ought to get our restaurant started. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to extend my floor, and I also want to leave some room for the walls, because I'm going to need those here in a little bit. So I'm going to expand out my floor. Now that I've got my scale, I need about another 3 units, plus another unit for the wall, so I want to scale it by 4. But keep in mind that when you scale a plane, it scales, a plane is 10 by 10. So by scaling it, we're really thinking in terms of 10 units. And so this is a little bit far, but I'm actually kind of liking the space here. So I'm going to go ahead and scale by 2. And since the restaurant is deeper than it is wide, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to scale my Z by 4. And that's going to kind of give me... That looks like that's going to be a little too big, though, because we really only want a few booths in here. So maybe 3. So I'm just kind of playing with these numbers until they start feeling right. That'll get me a decent starting point. I'm going to lay in a couple more booths here. So I'm going to move the booth. I want it so that it just leaves about 1 on the wall. So we're going to move it over to about 9. And that looks pretty good for a starting point. And then we're just going to duplicate the booth. There's 4 booths, so we're going to duplicate it 3 more times. And I'm going to move each of these booths to increments of 4. And that's going to give me that they're going to fit together kind of perfectly, which is good because eventually when I start doing their art, I want them to actually kind of seem to fit together as one piece. So we've got that going. Again, we're just kind of doing even multiples of 4. I'm cleaning up my math here to make sure that these work out. And that's looking pretty good for that space. I think, we've got the back wall should be here, and like the bathroom door is about here. And then there's this little entry area. So I think I can really cut this down. My map is a little bigger than I think I need. And so let's think about cutting off just a little bit on that depth. Maybe let's go 2.5 and see what happens there. 2.5 is getting closer. I'm thinking maybe 2.4. Again, each move is adding about 10. So when I cut 1 down, I'm really cutting down a total size of 10 here. So this is about 24 units deep. That's looking pretty good. But that also means I need to move each of my booths up about one whole unit, just to make sure that they fit flush against the wall, and that leaves a little bit more space here. And you know, the front entry is about one booth's width, and so this is going to look pretty good, I think, if I just move all these guys up. So since I want to move -1 off my Z, I'm just going to subtract one more. So -1 would be -9. And we're just going to grab each of these booths and just move them. Whoa, that's not right. We're going to grab each of these booths and make them move. Whoops, I wanted -5 there. We're going to move them each about one more. So -1 there. And we're going to move this to 3. And now we've got our booths moved. We've got a little bit of front entryway. That's starting to feel pretty good. So each of these is representing a booth. We've got that blocked out. And now we can kind of tackle that counter. And so the counter is pretty large. We also need to have another work counter behind it. A counter, I feel like if I'm using kind of 4 units, that feels like about 4 feet. So I feel like the counter should be about 3 feet across, and then kind of come down most of this space. So we're going to kind of take and steal some of what we did with the booths here. I'm going to grab another cube. We're going to move that over this way. And again, this is going to be representing my counter. We're going to zero those out. And for now, what I want to do is I want to make the counter about 3 wide, because if I'm thinking each unit is about a foot in my head here, so we're going to make the counter 3 feet wide. So we're going to go about 3x here. And since everything else was 4 tall, I'm going to go about 4. I'm going to move my Y to 2, so it's halfway up. That's a pretty good start. I think this is going to be a little bit cramped, but that's okay. And I'm not really worrying about my X position yet because I'm trying to just get my overall space. I did 4 booths at 4 each, and I want my counter to kind of go just a little bit more than this depth. So this is 16, but really the whole room is only about 20. So I want to kind of go in between there. So I'm going to go with 18 for my Z. And again, that's just kind of ballparking, but that feels pretty okay for my counter space. And then we want it to come up about a foot short. So I'm kind of eyeballing this. And at 2.19, I feel like if that's negative, just plain old -2, that feels pretty good. That's a pretty good startup for the counter. And again, I kind of want to color that. Let's differentiate that from the booths. So I'm going to duplicate my red material. And I'm going to color the new one. I don't know, kind of this orangish, yellowish. That's what I feel like I remember the counter being. And we'll drop that there. We've got a real ketchup and mustard look going here, which wasn't really my intent, but it's going to work. Anyways, and we want to create a little bit more walk room because there's also kitchen space, not kitchen space. I'm not doing the kitchen for this, but there's also like the counter space behind the counter. So what I'm thinking about doing here is maybe duplicating the counter that I just made and going pretty close to the wall. Again, I need to leave a little bit of room for the wall. So we're at 77177. Let's go. How wide is my floor again? My floor is 2 wide, which means it's about 20 wide. So let's go 7 point. I feel like 7.5 is probably. I think that's leaving about 1 for my cube. We'll see. That feels pretty good. So there's my back counter. My front counter, again, I just want to make it line up, and it feels like it should be about there. That'll give the the workers some room to work, and then the customers can kind of walk through that area, and then there's our booths. So that's feeling pretty okay. And I'm at 0.69, so let's go just 0.5. Again, we're going to nudge that over. That feels like a pretty good run. And I'm not worrying about things like there's the little lift on the counter there and there's another one over there. I'm just not worrying about that for now. The one thing I am going to do though is I'm going to move my cylinder. And since the booth typically like part of the counter kind of hangs out, I'm just going to move my cylinder so it's like halfway in. And that's pretty good there. So we're going to go ahead and just kind of pull that out. That feels good there. Because again, the counter would be partially caved in a little bit, and that would leave me some room for that. And then the last thing I want to do is I'm going to duplicate this one. Actually, I'm not even going to duplicate. I'm going to throw another cube in there. So I'm going to create a 3D object, which is going to be another cube. And again, we already kind of know some of the dimensions here. I'm going to set my Y to 2 and my height to 4. In this case, I want my Z to be 3, which is going to help kind of match what I've done everywhere else. So we're going to set Z3. And then my width, we're going to kind of eyeball that because I don't want to have to worry about it. So I'm going to hit the R key to go into scale mode. We're going to try that again. I'm going to hit the R key to go into scale mode. And I'm going to scale that cube until it feels kind of right. That feels pretty good. It's a little wider on this side and a little not wide enough there. And that'll just give me a chance to look at my scaling and go, what am I doing here? And so I have 9.57. We're going to nudge that down to 9.5 and see how we did as far as making that accurate. So we're going to pull that down here. Again, I'm looking for nice even round numbers. So Z5, let's just go Z5. Nope, not 5. How about 5.5? Okay, and that's running real flush with the rest of the counter there. And we're going to move my X over a little bit. And it looks like I didn't make my object quite big enough. So I'm going to go from 9.5 to 10. That's looking pretty flush. And if I do -4 instead of -394 on my X, everything looks like it's fitting in perfect. Again, we're seeing some of the stuff because of material tiling. And again, this isn't really how I would lay things out in a non-blockout situation, but for this, it's probably okay. And as soon as we put that color in, it stops messing up our setup. So the last thing I need to do is just duplicate a couple more stools. And since there's 7 of them, and the main reason I remember there's an odd number is on the Valentine's Day episode, Teddy sat at a stool without a couple. So we're going to go ahead and put 7 stools down there. I'm not, dividing by 7 gets kind of weird, so I'm not going to do that perfectly. But we've got 7 little stools there. Again, because I like having some color in my gray boxes so I can kind of see what's going on, I'm going to duplicate that wall, or duplicate my color one more time. And I'm going to kind of move it more into the brown range. I'm trying to find a brown that I actually like. Browns are kind of hard to find. That's almost more of a mahogany, isn't it? Let's get more up in there. Ooh, that looks pretty brown. It's not exactly what I was looking for, but it's going to be good enough for this. Although it does look better on the screen than it was looking on my preview. And I should probably make the stools a prefab as well, but I already did it, so I'm not going to worry about it too much. And there we go. So we've got some stools. We've got, and actually I'm not really happy with the stools. So I'm going to highlight all of them. And this is really why I should be using a prefab, but I used a combination of Control and Shift to get them all highlighted. Let's go ahead and make them, instead of scaling on 1, I'm going to scale on 1.5. That should make them 3 tall. And I'm going to place them at 1.5. And now those stools come up. And that's probably a little too far. Maybe we need 2.5 on those. Or let's go 1.2. That's a little bit better. And then we'll nudge those down to 1.2. That feels a lot better. So now they're just not quite as short. And they should have little red caps and stuff on them, but I'm not doing that level of detail right now. So now we have the basic layout. I've got my counter, I've got my booths, I've got my stools. That's feeling pretty okay. And then now I can start, I want to throw in some walls. And again, I've been leaving a padding of 1 around my entire room, with the idea that I can put some walls in here. And so since my plane is 2 by 2.4, it's 20 wide and 24 deep. And so I can really use that to my advantage here. I can take and create, actually I'm going to group these. I'm going to create a new game object. Let's do that. We're going to zero that out. We're going to just do a little bit of organization here. So I'm going to create a new game object called stools. We're going to move all of those in there. And we don't necessarily need to create a prefab out of this, but by doing that, now I can just click this drop down and I can also kind of just deal with them all at once. And I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to create another new game object for my booths. Again, zeroing that out. Whoops, let's try that again. Zeroing that out. And we're going to just move all the booths into that grouping. So that way we've cleaned up our organization on our screen a little bit. And actually these 3 cubes are going to make up the counter. So I'm going to make a counter group. Again, zeroing that out. I'm going to take the 3 cubes that represent the counter and put those in there. And now I can kind of just control those objects as a group if I need to. Like if I don't want to see the stools, I can just turn off that game object. And that's going to hide all the game objects inside of it. I didn't actually create prefabs out of anything. The booth remains the only prefabs. I probably should have done the stools as prefabs. That would have been smart. The counter is less important to do as a prefab because it is a singleton object. There's only it is the only one. Because if I start working with it, this counter is going to be a lot different than the back counter. And so there's not a real good reason to prefab that that I can see right now. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to do is do the walls. Again, my map is 20 by 24. So I'm going to create a walls prefab, or not walls prefab, excuse me, a walls group. Again, zeroing that out. And that's just going to hold my walls in there for organization purposes. Inside of that, I'm going to create a cube. And we know that this cube needs to be, I'm going to do about 8 tall, I think. That just feels about right to me, which means we need to start the cube at 4. That actually maybe feels a little short. Let's do 10. We'll do 10 and 5 for its Y position. That feels like a pretty decent wall height. And so that's going to look good. I'm at 941. Really, I should be at 9.5. That's going to perfectly put my wall right on the edge there. And you can see it's just filling in that gap really nicely. And since the depth is 24, because again, my plane is 2.4 deep, since my depth is 24, I'm going to do Z scaling is going to be 24. And that just made my wall nice and cleanly taking up that entire space. I can now duplicate that wall. And the nice thing is because I've been keeping everything centered, I know that it's going to be the exact opposite X and everything else is going to be the same. So I can just add a negative sign here. And so I've at negative 9.5, and now I've nicely boxed in my restaurant. And I'm going to create another cube and basically just do the exact same thing. So we're going to create another cube. We've already made a lot of the decisions here. We know that the Y scaling needs to be 10. In this case, the Z scaling is 1 because I'm going to do the front and the back walls. The X scaling should be 20 because it's 2 plane wide, which is a plane is 10 by 10 units. So again, if it's 2 wide, then setting this to 20 wide ought to do the trick. We're going to move this down to kind of eyeball. It looks like if my position is about, it's not quite far enough at 11.25, which tells me 11.5 should be the right spot. Y5, I've got that nicely boxed in. We're going to duplicate that and move, actually, we don't even, hang on, I'm going to put it there and then I'm going to realize I can control Z because like the previous one, really if I just set the Z as a negative, so I'm going to do a negative 11.5, it ought to perfectly close that gap there. And now I have a nice little box for Bob's Burgers. It's a starting point. And so my restaurant blockout, the big stuff is now blocked out. And this gives me a nice little starting point for doing future things. So at this point, I'm basically done. I could add more decoration. I could start finalizing models, etc. Now, for the next step of this tutorial, we're going to pretend some time has passed. So, we can do the Wayne's World time machine thing. But I realized that my booth sizes are very, very wrong. I actually tried to sculpt a booth. I don't have the results of that here to show you guys. But as it turns out, and this is why I wanted to talk about prefabs and game objects and really making sure that we don't do too much detail in our blockouts too soon, is that really, as it turns out, a booth should be more like 6 wide than 4 wide. And so my booths are way too tiny. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to walk you guys through enlarging those booths and seeing how that affects the rest of my layout and how quickly we can kind of adjust the rest of the layout around that. So the very, very first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to go into my booth prefab because we've realized that it's too small. Again, I want to do 6x4 instead. So I want to maintain the 4 wide, but I want them to be 6, basically 6 long. And so I'm going to add 2 more to my z-axis. And so in the cube, it's 4x4x4. But really what I want is I want this to be more like 4x4x6. And that's going to add me a little bit of depth. And in the short term, this is going to mess everything up. If I go back to my booths, you won't see much difference here. But the thing is these booths are actually overlapping each other. And we really don't want that. And then, more importantly, this booth is poking right clean on through the wall. So what we want to do is think about where our center is. And this one right here is kind of been serving as my anchor point for everything else. And so what I want to do is kind of move everything relative to that one. And so what I'm going to do is, since they're now 6 wide, I'm going to look at my math and go, okay, well, if this Z position is at -1, then really what I need to do here is take this guy, add 6, and that's going to take him to 5. And so we're going to stretch that out a little bit, and that's cutting really close in here. And then we're going to grab this next one. Again, this guy is at -1, so this one should be at more like -7. So we're going to push that out. And then this last one, we want to add 6 to -7. This one should be more like -13. So we definitely need to increase the size of the restaurant here. And that makes sense because that's going to make the counter fit a little bit better. We can adjust some other proportions and stuff in here. I think we need to adjust quite a few things actually to make this work smarter. Because if this is my new scale, we've got some other kind of problems. I feel like this area could be wider. Maybe we create a little bit more room here. My sense of proportion is feeling a little bit off. So what we're going to do is take all the booths. We're going to highlight the individual booths here. And I think I'm just going to move them 1 more to the outside. So they're at X9. I'm going to move those to X10. And again, that is kind of creeping into my wall here. So I'm going to add 1 to the wall as well. So this wall's position can be 10.5 instead of 9.5. And I'm going to do the same to the other wall. So we're going to go from -9.5 to -10.5. That's creating some room. That's creating a little bit of a gap with the booths, but I think that's going to be okay in a second. And because we've added some distance here, we need to make the restaurant floor itself a little bit deeper. So I'm going to grab my scaling tool, and I'm just going to grab the Z and kind of just go until it feels like it's taking up some more of this space, and then see what my results are. So again, I want to leave 1 here on the table to help fit things. But my Z scale is 3.507. Let's see what happens at 3.5. I think that's probably a little too wide for the wall. So let's see what happens at 3.4. So this is a total height of 34. That feels a lot closer to the thickness of a wall, so I think that's about 1. We can again move this to right there. That's going to be 16.64. How about 16.5? That's going to kind of close that up. And again, we want to make sure that the wall isn't inside the booth, but if we zoom in and we get close, it looks like we did pretty good there. And the wall is also taking up as much distance as the plane is, so we've got everything fitting pretty well. The next thing I need to do is widen the plane, so I'm going to get kind of in this view. The plane really just needs to come out 1 more on this side, which will mean 1 more on this side, so we just need to add 2. But again, because everything's 10, we really need to add 0.2 to a plane, and that's going to extend our walls out, and that's going to look great. And then so now we just need to kind of add some space on the main walls. So we're going to, again, go into scale mode to see if we can get those to fit. Again, 34 is looking like about the right distance here, so we're just going to trim that. 34 is looking pretty good. That is adding quite a bit to the front of the restaurant, and maybe more to the front of the restaurant than I really wanted. And so now we're kind of just doing fine adjustments. I'm going to take this wall here. It's kind of in my way. We're just going to hide that for now. So I'm just going to uncheck it in the inspector. I think this gap is a bit much. And since we did say that the floor should be about 1 booth height, this isn't really working for me. And so I want to go, if each booth is 6, and I've got 4 of them, I want a 5th booth. This really should be about 30 deep. And I think we said it's 34 now. So I'm going to nudge this. We're going to call this 3.2. Nope, not 32. How about 3.2? Because once we shrink this down a little bit, again, we got to move everything over by about 1. And then once we put a wall in here, that should leave about 1 booth in there. So this proportion is feeling a little bit better to me. I realize it's only 1 different, but it's really mattering. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to grab the position of each booth. We're going to move it Z positive by 1, just to nudge it, I guess Z negative by 1, huh? We're going to move it Z negative by 1, just to get, nope, that we do need Z positive by 1. That should be 6. There we go. Sorry, I could not math. But we're moving everything just a little bit. So we'll go -6 there. We're going to go -12 there. And I'm going to grab that wall. We're going to move it by another 1. So that'll be 15.5. And now, again, we're lined up with the new floor, and everything is feeling pretty good there. That feels like a really good depth. It's starting to look a little bit more like the restaurant I want it to be. So we are going to shorten that wall. We did take a couple of feet off that, so we're going to go down to 32. That's going to fix that one. And now that we know our sizes, we're doing a lot better job here. So this is 32, so we can increase this one to 32 as well. That's going to make that wall perfect. This wall is at position -15.5 and is 20 wide. And really, actually, it needs to get a little bit wider because we did widen the room. So that should be 22. There we go. So it's at 22 wide and 15.5 there. So we can bring our other wall back, and we can kind of do the exact same thing. So we're going to go 22 and then -15.5 or +15.5. We've reblocked things out, and now all we've got to deal with is that counter. Again, I'm going to hide, actually, I'm just going to hide all the walls. So we're going to turn that game object off, and we're going to start adjusting the counter a little bit. So again, this is 24 wide, so I'm just going to start by widening the counter. It was at 18, we'll go 24. That's actually solving most of our problem by itself. And then all we've got to do is I'm going to hit the W key to adjust my position. We're just going to kind of adjust it back so it goes back into the wall a little bit closer. Again, that got us to 3.3. I feel like maybe with this one we want to move it forward a little bit. So 3 feels pretty good. That feels like it's lined up with everything else. We'll check it when we get the wall in there, but that feels pretty good to me. And that's still leaving room for that wall when we put it back. And then we're going to grab this guy and move him forward. Again, we got a nice little estimate there. We're kind of estimating it off of this. This is sticking out just a little bit at 7.46. This is probably 7.5. That's lining that up nicely. We do need to make it a little bit wider. It looks like we added a space of about 2 there. But you know what? Well, yeah, I want to add some more walking space there, and I want to add some more walking space on the restaurant. So I think what we're going to do is instead of adding 2 to the width, we're going to add 1 to the width and then move it over by 1. That'll give it a little bit more room here, but it'll also give this aisleway a little bit more room. So we're just kind of playing around. Again, we're just kind of playing around with this. So my X scale, again, we're going to add 1 to it. And then we're going to move it over by, actually at that point, we need to move it over by 0.5. So we're going to go negative, instead of -4, let's go, -5 was too far. So let's go -4.5. That's moving it into, we've got some wall space, but we've also created a little bit more width there. I think that might be a little too... We may have made that a little bit too wide. Let's go ahead and cut the scale down. The X scale, let's go ahead and cut that down to 10. No, how about 10, not 110? Let's go ahead and cut that down to 10 and nudge it over another 0.5 or so on the X. We're just going to go to -5. And that's going to allow us to, again, bump the, make this aisleway a little bit bigger. So we're going to nudge this. Again, we're just starting to see that. So that looks like that should be -1.5. That's looking pretty good. We can grab our stools, kind of nudge them over a little bit. Actually, we can put them right back on the 0 line. Now they're looking pretty good. And then the last adjustment we're going to make is that back counter. And actually, I forgot there is a door to the kitchen. So I think we're just going to leave the counter's length here. But we're going to adjust, we're going to just adjust it over into that space. It's at -838. So how about -8.5? We'll probably make that pretty close to perfect. And now we've got our counter space. We've got some room to get into the door here. And I think if we put our walls back, I think we've got us a nice little restaurant here. So there's our new restaurant. And now that I'm looking at this design, I'm definitely liking this a lot better. This feels a lot more like the design from Bob's Burgers. I'm thinking about, like, there's that counter space here to walk through. There shouldn't have been a stool there anyways, so this is feeling pretty good. We've got some room for that doorway back there. We've got a little bit of room for that counter flip that would normally go there. So if I started modeling this, I think I would be able to do a lot better job with this layout than the previous one. And it didn't take us that long to adjust. So this is our new basic frame layout. Eventually at some point I am going to go ahead and actually I do want to model this restaurant. I want to kind of do a realistic take on the texturing and stuff. But for now, this is as far as I'm going to take this. So this is going to be the end of the tutorial. As always, if you enjoyed things, please hit like and subscribe. For our next tutorial, we're going to be working on something completely different. We're going to start some basics on a first-person shooter. So stay tuned for that. All right, so have a great day, nerds. I hope you enjoyed this, and as always, keep on creating.